holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy should itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. And greetings from Technocracy News and Trends. Patrick Wood here, editor-in-chief and founder of Technocracy News and Trends. I would mention early on in this broadcast that Technocracy.news is still the only critical source of information on technocracy in the world. Either I'm dead right or I'm dead wrong. I'll bet on being dead right at this point. But as you can see, if you go to Technocracy.news and scroll down and look at the right-hand side, there's a little map of the world with red dots all over it. And those red dots represent people who come and read Technocracy.news from every continent, from every nation. In fact, literally from every nation in the world, we've had at least a few readers, and that would include some nations you probably never even knew existed. But I researched it and found it out, and Technocracy.news literally is a global website right now, and people are critically interested all around the world to hear about technocracy. And even if people in America are still ignoring it, people around the world understand it. People in China even understand it. People in Asia, New Zealand, Australia, Africa, Asia, India, they get it. Sometimes Americans are a little dense on this topic. But I hope you were able to listen to my podcast earlier this week that was titled Technocracy on the Road to Scientific Dictatorship. This was a presentation that I delivered on Saturday to the 37th Annual Doctors for Disaster Preparedness Convention in Tucson, Arizona. That was Saturday, July 20, by the way. And the title of it, the reason I picked the title of it, Technocracy on the Road to Scientific Dictatorship, is that it gave me great latitude to talk about technocracy in general and how indeed it is leading towards a scientific dictatorship. But I hope you can share that broadcast as well with anybody that you know, because people need to understand what technocracy really is, where it came from, what its history is, what it means to us today. And people ask questions like, well, is 5G a part of the plan? Yes. And people ask, is smart grid part of the plan? The smart meters that are being put on the side of homes and businesses? Yes. Well, what about vaccinations in the medical industry and all the changes that are happening there? Is that part of technocracy? Yes. What about smart growth and smart plans in cities, where cities are now racing, panting, literally, after the Green New Deal? Is that part of technocracy? Yes. Well, we need to get to the bottom of this. If we are going to reject technocracy, we must understand it. And at this point, not enough people understand it. That's why I will continue to speak until people do understand it. And other writers and journalists and TV and broadcast people pick up on it and start doing additional research on it. We simply must reject it. Some of the stories that I have posted on Technocracy.news this week are just head shakers. That's about all I can say. You just shake your head, wonder what has happened to the world. Has it gone mad? One story talks about a study that was just released that indicates that racial bias is extending to robots. That's right, black and white robots. It says, if you do a quick Google search for robot, the word robot, R-O-B-O-T, you'll be faced with a wall of white robots. According to a recent study called Robots and Racism, humans' tendency to stereotype racial bias is seeping into the world of robotics. Research by the Human Interface Technology Lab in New Zealand. They found that the colors of a robot, black and white, have a social cue that results in how people interact with and respond to them. The results suggest that people perceive robots with an anthropomorphic features to have a race and therefore the same race-related prejudices that humans experience extends to robots too. Well, that's fine for black and white robots, but what about blue robots and green robots and every other color under the sun that they might be made of? Do they have a racial bias as well? I cannot imagine spending money on a study that would result in an outcome like this that says, yep, robotics are turning racist. So I guess if you're a robot maker, boy, you better not make a robot of the wrong color or you're liable to be attacked, label lynched, vilified on social media. So-and-so company or so-and-so engineer is a racist. Why, he made a white robot or a black robot, or what if he made a purple robot? Well, this is just insanity. Another little piece of insanity is another story posted today. This headline, Green New Deal activists glue themselves to the Capitol. And they chanted as they were superglued to the walls and to each other. They chanted, "What do we want? Green New Deal. When do we want it? Now." This radical global group called Extinction Rebellion now has chapters in 45 countries around the world. And they're all calling and clamoring for the Green New Deal. This article states on Tuesday evening, members of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Extinction Rebellion superglued themselves to each other and to the passages connecting the Capitol to the Rayburn and Cannon office buildings where House members have their offices. The protesters, who are part of an international group that uses nonviolent civil disobedience tactics to advocate for action on climate change, aim to confront House members on their way to floor votes. Many of the protesters, who did not expect to protest longer than 15 minutes, remained glued for more than 2 hours, alongside dozens of demonstrators who rallied as a distraction. They wore signs over their shirts that said, "Declare climate emergency." And then they chanted, "What do we want? Green New Deal," over and over and over again. Capitol Police asked bystanders and reporters to move back, and then after 3 warnings, kicked everybody out, except, of course, those who were glued. They arrested only 13 activists, according to Extinction Rebellion. This story, by the way, did not hit any general news media anywhere. I happened to find it in a rather obscure place. Members of Congress, for the most part, the article states, ignored the protesters. Yeah, no kidding. Representative Jim Banks, Republican from Indiana, former vice chair of the House Subcommittee on Environment, mocked the group on Twitter, posting a video of himself appearing to duck under a protester's arm that was glued to the wall. He had to get through, and he added the note, "Supergluing yourself to a door is a very dumb way to protest." What can you say? These people are bent on making fools of themselves. It's really a sad thing. Mayors around the nation are rising up, getting together and rising up as a group to call for a new Marshall Plan to fight global warming. It's incredible. The article states a committee of 10 Democrats promised to continue studying climate change, holding more hearings and fostering partnerships with governments at all other levels, as well as the private sector. Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto this week called for a Marshall Plan for the Midwest and a national challenge to fight climate change, while Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell separately urged the creation of a federal department focused on resiliency. Resiliency is a topic that Technocracy News has followed for some time. You might remember that we posted some articles about the Rockefeller Foundation that has had in the past a resiliency program called 100 Resilient Cities, and they gave money and policy documents to cities all over the world. Well, apparently that program, even though transferred to the Atlantic Institute, that program is apparently bearing fruit, because mayors from large cities now are themselves clamoring for a massive rebuild of American infrastructure. A Marshall Plan, really? The Marshall Plan was what was used after rebuilding after a global war. Well, we don't have a global war, but they're likening climate change and the war against climate to be comparable to a world war where people are actually shooting and killing each other. They have their priorities misplaced, I fear. And I dare say that anyone who lives in a city, which is probably most of us, it's time to get out and meet your mayor and meet your city council people and bring them back down to earth again, or pull them out of the rabbit hole, whichever. But they need to come and start to live where people actually are living and understand what's going on. This lunacy just needs to stop. Yesterday, I posted an article from Forbes Magazine. The headline I used, very close to their headline, Climate Change Denial is a Cancer on the U.S. Economy. Now, there was a time when Forbes Magazine had a conservative bias. Those days are gone. They're no longer conservative. They bought into the radical environmental premise that the U.S. economy is being hindered by those who deny climate change. Of course, they're taking a swipe at President Trump as well, because he does. But they're basically saying the problem in America and why we're limited in our progress is because of the climate deniers. Well, Al Gore said a few years ago that climate deniers deserve to be punished. I guess he knew what he was talking about, really, because he must have been talking to Forbes Magazine along the way. They're coming up with the same idea. Well, if those old climate deniers out there, I would include myself in that group, by the way, if we're the ones who are destroying the American economy, then I guess we need literally to be punished. Shame on us. Bad, bad people. Wrecking the American economy. Well, readers of Technocracy News who have followed this website as well as my writings for years and years, you know that the reason that the U.S. economy is in dire straits today is not because of climate change deniers. It's because, in particular, of sustainable development, where climate change is merely used as the panic button to get people to drive themselves right over the cliff into sustainable development. You just have to shake your head at it. Now, yesterday, I actually wrote a story myself that was called How Free Trade is Still Killing America. And I have to give a shout out to one of our readers who sent me a video that tipped me off on this story. I could not resist commenting on it. And the video featured Sir James Goldsmith from 1994. Yes, he was a member of the EU superstructure, but he had his head screwed on right as far as free trade is concerned. And he was interviewed on national television by Charlie Rose. Well, those of you who don't know this, Charlie Rose was a long-term member of the Trilateral Commission. He was totally complicit with them, went to all the meetings, interviewed all the people. He had a constant stream of people from the Trilateral Commission on his program over the years, including people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, Fareed Zakaria, various secretaries of state and other prominent dignitaries from around the world. He had them all on. One time he had Sir James Goldsmith on from England. Goldsmith schooled Charlie Rose. I don't think Rose accepted it very well, but he did. And I think at the end of that program, Rose had probably determined he was never going to ask Sir James Goldsmith back again. But how I constructed this article was just from this point of view. I said, when the Trilateral Commission set about to create a new international economic order in 1973, so-called free trade blossomed as nations dropped their external tariffs and allowed multi-directional trade. Before 1973, there was no trade deficits, as evidenced by the chart below, and I encourage you to go read that article and look at the chart. It's just dramatic. Starting in 1976, after the declaration of the new international economic order by the Trilateral Commission, the very next thing that we see happening by 3 years later, in 1976, the trade deficit started and grew to historic levels of over $50 billion per month. This cumulative deficit from 1976 through 2018 is $13.1 trillion. And this represents the loss of national wealth. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story as a side note about shadow banning information. I searched the internet thoroughly to try and find the figure of what the cumulative trade deficit has been since the early 1970s. You would be surprised to know that I could not find a single article that clearly stated what this cumulative balance is. There were some smaller periods of time that got referenced, and there were some references to individual countries, like what was a trade deficit with China. But nobody has taken the total figure from all the trade deficits since the early 70s and simply just said, this is what it is. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist out there. Maybe you'll be luckier than me and you'll find it. But I found the data. I found a table of data on a website that showed every deficit starting with 1960, and it had the actual numbers listed down in a column. So I pulled out my handy-dandy Microsoft Excel program, and I typed in those numbers, and I totaled them. And it came up to $13.1 trillion. So now you know what the story is here. From 1976 through 2018, the U.S. has lost $13.1 trillion in national wealth, and that does not include 2019, which is on pace right now for almost record levels. This is the amount of wealth that America has lost over this period of time. This was a direct result of the so-called free trade mantra. And in the next 25 years, since the interview with Sir James Goldsmith, the working class of America has been economically gutted, just as he correctly predicted. Wealth has been transferred to global corporations who have no national boundaries or loyalty. We can thank the various treaties that promoted free trade, so-called, NAFTA, GATT, that's the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. Goldsmith just nailed it down. He said this is going to be a formula for disaster, and he's absolutely right. And I have to say, it wasn't because Goldsmith was such a genius, some kind of an economic genius. I don't think that he was. I think what he had, however, was a lot of common sense. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that the scam that the Trilateral Commission has pulled on the world ever since 1973 with this whole free trade bit, pretty much anybody could figure this out if they had a little common sense. And yet people like Charlie Rose will sit across a table, look Goldsmith right in the eye and say, but free trade is good for everybody. It creates jobs all over the place, you know. And this is how they have conned most of the world into going along with their crazy schemes, bullying, peer pressure, restating a lie over and over and over until people simply give up and believe it. I believe Sir James Goldsmith died in 1997, just a few years after this interview. My guess is he didn't change his mind. And quite honestly, since the early 1970s, I've never changed my mind either. This whole free trade thing has been a scam of epic proportions. The world has never seen anything like it before. And if you want more understanding on it, I just have to say, get a copy of one of my books on technocracy. There's nothing else like it in the world. The rate things are going, they probably never will be either. But it does connect the dots for you, and it does it with documented sources, and it adds in quite a bit of scholarship and research along the way. You make up your own mind then. If you think I'm wrong, then quit listening and quit reading. If you think I'm right, you better stand up and be counted, because the train is coming down the track and it has your name on it. A good friend of mine and our director of training at citizensforfreespeech.org, she was told one time by a liberal counterpart, if you don't have a seat at the table, you are what's on the menu. That is the truth of the matter. If you're sitting in your living room and listening to Fox News every night, shaking your fist at the TV and saying there ought to be a law or that somebody ought to do something about it, well, it's your time to do something about it. Nobody else is going to save us. Only you can save your own city, your own locality, and you start by discussion. You start by persuasion. You start by appeal. You start by presenting the facts to your local city council members and your elected officials, your mayor, and say, we are the people of this city. We need your help. We need your protection. We need you to do things that will help us actually build a better community that serves the people We need to drive down costs, not drive them up with all of these Agenda 21 regulations and stuff that are being imposed everywhere around the country. We need you to help build a better place for us to live and for our children and grandchildren to live. And you're not doing it that way. What you're doing is anti-American, anti-capitalism, anti-free enterprise, and in many cases, it's flat out anti-human. Please stop that, sir. Do other things that will bless our community and not destroy it. Well, I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. We'll see you next time.